My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 36 years old, and until that Saturday afternoon, I thought I knew exactly what kind of life I was building. Not a perfect life. I was never that naive. Ethan and I had our arguments, our quiet dinners where neither of us knew how to apologize first, our bills stacked on the kitchen island, our plans that kept getting delayed because real life always seemed to cost more than we expected. But I believed in us. That was the embarrassing part later. I believed in us so completely that I mistook routine for loyalty. Ethan was away that weekend at what he called a leadership wellness retreat. 3 days at a lakeside lodge with meditation, cold plunges, and men in expensive hoodies talking about purpose. He had kissed my forehead before leaving and told me, "Don't work too hard while I'm gone." I laughed and said, "Then don't come home shocked if the attic still looks haunted." We had been planning to turn the attic into a small office. My office, technically, since I worked from home 2 days a week, but Ethan kept calling it our productivity room, which already sounded like something from one of his retreats. The attic smelled like dust, cedar, and old cardboard. Afternoon light came through the small circular window, catching particles in the air like tiny pieces of ash. I had music playing downstairs, too faint to hear clearly, just enough to remind me the house wasn't completely silent. I started with the obvious boxes first: Christmas lights, broken picture frames, college textbooks neither of us had opened in a decade. Then I moved a stack of plastic bins and found a narrow shoebox tucked behind an old wreath. It wasn't labeled. That should not have mattered. People keep all kinds of things in unlabeled boxes: receipts, photos, batteries, random cords for devices they no longer own. I opened it, expecting junk. Instead, I found letters. Not printed emails, not birthday cards, handwritten letters on thick cream stationery, folded carefully, tied with a faded blue ribbon, all addressed to the same woman. Marissa. I knew that name. Marissa Calloway, Ethan's college girlfriend. The woman he once described as a lifetime ago. The woman he said had been intense, unstable, impossible to build a future with. She loved drama, he told me early in our relationship. "You're different, Claire. You're peaceful." At the time, I thought it was a compliment. Now, sitting cross-legged on attic plywood, I untied the ribbon and unfolded the top letter. The date was 14 months ago, right around the time I had received a promotion, right around the time we had finally paid off the last of Ethan's lingering credit card debt, right around the time he started talking seriously about refinancing the house because, according to him, equity is how smart couples build wealth. I remember the first sentence because it felt like a hand closing around my throat. He wrote that the plan was still working. Not a mistake, not confusion, a plan. He wrote that I was finally earning enough for things to move faster, that the house was gaining value, that if he stayed patient, he could walk away with enough security to start over without struggling like before. Then came the line I read 5 times before my brain allowed it to become real. "When I'm done building the life I need with her, I'll come back to you." I did not scream. I did not throw the box. I did not run downstairs and call him. Something colder happened. The room became very still. My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. My hands were steady. My eyes moved across the page like I was reading someone else's tragedy. There were 7 more letters. They stretched across almost our entire relationship. In the earlier ones, Ethan described me as safe. Later, useful. Then, almost there. He wrote about my savings discipline like it was a trait he could harvest. He mentioned my inheritance from my grandmother, the money I used for the down payment on our home, as if it were a door he had been waiting for me to unlock. And Marissa, at least in the version inside those letters, was the woman waiting at the end of his performance. The love story behind the curtain. I sat there for a long time. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe an hour. The attic light shifted. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked. My phone buzzed once with a message from Ethan. "Hope your day is calmer than mine. Miss you." I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I opened the camera. I photographed every letter, front and back, dates, envelopes, the box, the place where I found it. I took more photos than necessary because the part of me that still wanted to be wrong needed proof from every possible angle. After that, I put everything back exactly as it had been. The ribbon, the order, the shoebox behind the wreath. I carried 2 trash bags downstairs like nothing had changed. Then I made dinner. Pasta. Too much salt. I ate half of it standing at the counter because sitting at the table felt suddenly impossible. That night, I slept in our bed and stared at Ethan's empty pillow. By morning, I knew what I was going to do. Not because I was brave. Because the version of me who would have begged for an explanation had died somewhere between the 3rd and 4th letter. On Monday, I called out sick from work. Then I searched for attorneys who handled property disputes, broken engagements, and financial deception between unmarried partners with shared assets. Ethan and I were not legally married yet, but our lives were tangled enough to make leaving messy. The house, the joint savings account, the renovation fund, the furniture, the automatic transfers he had pushed me to increase. By noon, I had sent an email to a lawyer named Dana Mercer. Subject: Urgent consultation. Documented financial deception by partner. I attached the photos. She called me 42 minutes later. Her voice was calm, but not soft. "Claire," she said, "I need you to understand something. Do not confront him alone. Do not move money without advice. Do not warn him. And do not let him know what you found until we have protections in place." For the first time since the attic, my throat tightened. "So I'm not overreacting?" Dana paused. "No," she said. "You are underreacting, which may help us." On Tuesday morning, I sat in her office with a folder in my lap and sunglasses on my head, even though it was raining. Dana read through the letters again in front of me. Her expression changed slowly. Professional interest first, then disbelief, then something sharper. "He wrote all of this down?" she asked. "Yes." "And these are his letters to Marissa?" "Yes." "Do you know whether she responded?" "I didn't find responses." Dana leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said, "then he either had an accomplice, an audience, or a fantasy. None of those are good for him." We spent the next 2 hours building a map of my life. The house was in both names, but the down payment had come entirely from my grandmother's inheritance. I had bank records. The joint savings account had about $48,000. Based on transfers, I had contributed close to 70%. Ethan had pushed for that account to be our future fund. Our future. I almost laughed. Dana told me we would file to partition the property, freeze the joint account, and document the financial pattern before Ethan had a chance to drain anything. Since we were not married, there would be no divorce, no spousal support, no romantic courtroom speech about broken vows. Just assets. Just evidence. Somehow, that made it worse. 5 years together, reduced to deposits, transfers, signatures, receipts. By Friday, Dana had everything ready. On Sunday evening, Ethan came home. He walked in, sunburned and smiling, carrying a canvas duffel bag and smelling like eucalyptus and expensive soap. "Claire," he called, "you would not believe how intense that retreat was." I was sitting in the living room. On the coffee table was a sealed envelope from Dana's office. Ethan noticed it before he noticed my face. "What's that?" I looked at him. For a second, I saw the man I thought I loved. The man who held my hand at my grandmother's funeral. The man who once cried because he said no one had ever believed in him the way I did. Then I saw the handwriting from the letters. "It's legal notice," I said. His smile faded. "For what?" "For the house, the accounts, everything we built while you were writing to Marissa about how useful I was." The color drained from his face so quickly, it was almost satisfying. Almost. Ethan didn't touch the envelope immediately. He just stood there near the doorway, one hand still gripping the strap of his duffel bag, staring at me like I had suddenly started speaking another language. "What?" he said quietly. I had imagined this moment all week. In some versions, he denied everything instantly. In others, he collapsed into apologies before I even finished speaking. Once, at 3 a.m. while staring at the ceiling, I imagined myself throwing the letters in his face and screaming until my throat tore open. But now that he was actually here, all I felt was tired. "The letters," I said. "The ones in the attic." His expression flickered. Just for a second. Fear. Tiny. Immediate. Real. Then it disappeared behind outrage. "You went through my private things?" There it was. Not confusion. Not "what letters?" Not "Claire, this isn't what you think." Just anger that he got caught. I watched him carefully while he crossed the room and grabbed the envelope from the coffee table. His fingers shook slightly as he opened it. Dana had prepared everything neatly. Temporary financial restrictions. Notice regarding the joint account. Property claim documentation connected to my inheritance contribution. The farther Ethan read, the paler he became. "This is insane." "No," I said softly. Finding out my boyfriend spent years planning his financial exit strategy while smiling in my face was insane. That's not what this was. I almost smiled at how quickly he recovered. Fast. Smooth. Controlled. The Ethan I knew could walk into a room full of angry clients and leave with everyone laughing. He could sell reassurance like it was a religion. Now he tried it on me. "Claire, those letters were never meant literally." "Then why write 8 of them?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. I stood up slowly from the couch. "You tracked my raises in those letters," I said. "You wrote about my inheritance. You talked about waiting until the house gained enough equity. That isn't emotional journaling, Ethan. That's project management." His jaw tightened. "You're twisting things." I photographed everything. That landed. I saw the exact moment panic entered the room. His eyes darted toward the staircase leading upstairs, toward the attic, calculating whether the box was still there, whether he could destroy it, whether it mattered anymore. "You had no right to invade my privacy. And you had every right to build a future around deceiving me? You're acting crazy right now." The word crazy hung between us like something rotten. A week ago, it would have hurt me. Now it just sounded predictable. "You told her you were using me." I was venting. "For 3 years?" His breathing changed. Faster now. The performance was slipping. "Marissa reached out during a rough time," he snapped. I was confused. "So confused you created timelines for leaving me?" "That's not—" "You wrote that once you were financially stable enough, you'd go back to her." Silence. Then came the first crack. Ethan sat down heavily in the armchair across from me and rubbed both hands over his face. "Claire." There it was, the softer voice. The remorseful one. "I never meant for you to see those." I laughed before I could stop myself. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. That's your defense? No, listen to me. His eyes looked wet now. People write stupid things when they're unhappy. Were you unhappy? Another hesitation. Too long. And somehow that hurt more than the letters. Because even now, even cornered, he was still calculating the best answer instead of telling the truth. I was scared, he said finally. Okay? I was scared of commitment, scared of building this huge life and failing you. So you wrote to another woman about using me? You're reducing it. No, I said quietly. I'm simplifying it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed. Ordinary sounds inside a completely destroyed life. Ethan looked around the house like he was seeing it differently now. The navy curtains I picked out. The hardwood floors I paid to refinish. The framed photographs from vacations that suddenly looked staged. Then he whispered, "Are you really doing this?" I stared at him. That question almost broke something in me. Not because of guilt. Because part of him genuinely believed I wouldn't leave. Even after the letters. Even after the deception. Somewhere deep down, Ethan thought I loved him enough to accept humiliation if he explained it well enough. No, I said. You already did this. His face hardened immediately. The softness vanished like a light switching off. Wow. I folded my arms. Wow what? You're really going to throw away 5 years over private thoughts? Private thoughts. Not betrayal. Not manipulation. Private thoughts. I'm throwing away a future built on fraud. Oh my God, listen to yourself, he snapped, standing again. Fraud? You sound insane. Dana warned me he would probably cycle through tactics. Charm. Anger. Self-pity.
Blame.
Watching it happen in real time was horrifying, because it meant none of this was spontaneous. This was just who he was. You know what your problem is? He continued. You always need certainty. Everything has to be black and white with you. I felt something inside me go still again. That coldness from the attic returned. No, I said. My problem is, I trusted someone who was planning an escape while pretending to build a home. He opened his mouth again, but his phone buzzed. Marissa. Her name flashed across the screen. The room froze. Ethan looked at the phone like it was a bomb. Then he declined the call so fast it was almost violent. I watched every second of it. Interesting. Very interesting. She knows? I asked. She called earlier. And? She heard about this somehow. I tilted my head slightly. From who? He didn't answer. Which was answer enough. That night, Ethan packed a bag. Not because I told him to. Because Dana already advised me not to stay alone in the house with him after confrontation escalated. She had arranged temporary paperwork fast enough that Ethan clearly realized he could not bully his way into financial control anymore. Before leaving, he stood near the front door for a long time. I do love you, he said quietly. The worst part? A tiny piece of me wanted to believe him. Not because the letters disappeared. Not because logic changed. But because grief is humiliating like that. It reaches for comfort from the person who caused the wound. I looked at him carefully. Really looked. At the man who remembered how I liked my coffee. The man who kissed my forehead before business trips. The man who once held me all night after a panic attack. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. A person can love parts of you and still use you. Those things are not mutually exclusive. I think, I said slowly, you loved being safe. His eyes filled immediately, but I continued before he could speak. And I think you confused that with loving me. He left without another word. The silence afterward felt enormous. I locked the door. Then I walked through the house, turning on lights one by one, because darkness suddenly felt dangerous. By midnight, Ethan's mother called. I almost didn't answer. I had met Linda Hayes maybe 9 times in 5 years. She lived in Arizona, sent generic Christmas gifts, and once spent an entire dinner explaining why women over 30 should freeze their eggs before reality kicks in. Now her voice came sharp through the phone at nearly 1 in the morning. What exactly are you doing to my son? I leaned against the kitchen counter. Good evening to you too. Ethan is devastated. Interesting. Not ashamed. Not sorry. Devastated. He should try finding less incriminating hobbies. Oh, don't be dramatic, Linda snapped. He told me about the letters. Did he mention the part where he called me a financial stepping stone? He was venting. For 3 years? You women always do this, she said bitterly. You destroy relationships over emotions written in private. I closed my eyes. There it was again. Not concern about truth. Only concern about consequences. He documented plans around my income, my assets, and my inheritance. You're not married. Exactly. So what's the issue? You still have your money. I laughed softly. The sound scared even me. You think this is about money? What else would it be? That question sat inside me long after the call ended. What else would it be? Trust. Humiliation. The realization that someone had been measuring your value in percentages and equity while you were imagining growing old together. The next morning, I received an email from a woman I had never met. Marissa Calloway. Subject line. I didn't know. My heartbeat slowed as I opened it. Claire. I don't know what Ethan told you, but I need you to understand something. I had no idea those letters existed until yesterday. Ethan contacted me after you confronted him. We have not been together in years. I'm engaged. I want no involvement in whatever fantasy he created around me. Fantasy. That word echoed strangely. Because suddenly, the story shifted. Either Marissa was lying to save herself, or Ethan had spent years writing love letters into a void while using me as emotional and financial shelter. Honestly, I wasn't sure which possibility was worse. I forwarded the email directly to Dana. Her response came 10 minutes later. Doesn't matter whether Marissa participated. The letters still reveal his intent and financial pattern. Also, Claire, do not underestimate what embarrassed men do when control disappears. That warning proved accurate faster than either of us expected. Because 2 hours later, the bank notified me someone attempted to transfer $15,000 from the joint account. Ethan. Dana called me before I could even process the bank notification. Did you authorize any transfers? She asked immediately. No? Good. Don't contact him. Too late. My phone was already lighting up with Ethan's name. 3 missed calls. Then 4. Then a text. You froze the account? Another. Claire, this is insane. Then, I need access to my money. I stared at the screen for several seconds before setting the phone face down on the kitchen counter. Dana's voice remained calm. The emergency restriction went through faster than expected. He probably assumed he had more time. He tried to move $15,000. Yes, she said, which helps us. Nothing about this felt helpful. Every hour seemed to reveal a new layer of deception beneath the previous one. It was like pulling wallpaper off a wall and discovering rot underneath, then mold beneath the rot. Dana continued, "From now on, everything stays documented. No emotional responses, no phone calls unless necessary. Let him create the mess." And Ethan absolutely did. By Wednesday, he had transformed from apologetic to furious. The texts became longer. "Krula, you're humiliating me. You're blowing this out of proportion. You always had control issues. You want to destroy my life because of words on paper." Then, my personal favorite, "After everything I did for you." I read that one 3 times. After everything I did for you. As if loyalty were something he deserved payment for. As if not betraying me should have earned him gratitude. I blocked his number after that. Dana handled the rest. The following week blurred into spreadsheets, legal paperwork, and emotional exhaustion. I gathered every financial record I could find. Mortgage statements, inheritance documents, renovation receipts, contribution histories. I learned things about my own relationship that made me feel physically sick. Ethan had repeatedly encouraged me to increase automatic transfers into our shared savings while quietly reducing his own contributions. He framed it as being strategic. He complimented my discipline constantly. "You're so much better with money than I am." At the time, it sounded vulnerable. Now it sounded tactical. One evening, while sorting through old emails for Dana, I found a message from Ethan sent 2 years earlier. "We should prioritize long-term stability now, so we can enjoy freedom later." Freedom later. I sat at my dining table, staring at those words until my vision blurred. The worst betrayals weren't always dramatic. Sometimes they were subtle. Carefully folded into ordinary conversations until you could no longer separate manipulation from intimacy. The preliminary hearing arrived gray and cold. I wore a charcoal blazer Dana picked out because she said judges unconsciously trusted people who looked composed instead of wounded. "Do not let him pull you into emotion," she reminded me outside the courtroom. "He'll want a reaction." What if I already ran out of reactions? Dana gave me a long look. "Then today will go very well for you." Ethan arrived with his attorney and his mother. Linda spotted me instantly and narrowed her eyes like I had personally burned their family home down. Ethan looked terrible. Not devastated. Disrupted. There was a difference. His hair was messier than usual. Dark circles shadowed beneath his eyes. But what struck me most was the anger underneath everything else. Not grief over losing me. Resentment over consequences. Our eyes met briefly. For a fraction of a second, I saw panic there. Then, performance mode took over. His lawyer, Brent Lawson, had the exact energy I expected from someone expensive enough to bill by the sigh. Polished smile, silver tie, voice smooth as polished wood. When proceedings started, Brent framed Ethan as a deeply emotional man whose private writings had been weaponized. "These letters," Brent said carefully, "represent emotional processing during a period of confusion and depression. My client never acted on these thoughts." Dana didn't even blink. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and zero patience, looked over the letters again. 8 letters over several years, she noted. That's extensive processing. A few people in the courtroom chuckled quietly. Brent pressed on anyway. "My client was uncertain about his future and vented privately to someone from his past. That does not constitute financial exploitation." Dana stood. Calm. Precise. Controlled. "Your Honor, intent matters," especially when paired with financial behavior. She handed over binders. Color-coded. Every contribution, every transfer, every discrepancy. Dana walked the court through our finances like she was dismantling a machine, piece by piece. Claire Whitmore contributed 71% of the joint savings. Claire Whitmore paid the entire down payment using inherited funds prior to co-ownership. Claire Whitmore funded most documented renovations. Meanwhile, Ethan Hayes repeatedly encouraged increased joint contributions, while privately describing Claire as temporary financial infrastructure. The courtroom became very quiet. Then Dana submitted the emails. The texts. The financial recommendations Ethan pushed. One text from 18 months earlier read, "We should max out the investment account now, while we still have momentum." Another, "Trust me, babe, we're building security together." Together. The judge read silently for a long moment. Then she looked directly at Ethan. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "these writings paint a troubling picture." Ethan swallowed visibly. Brent stepped in quickly. He never intended harm. The judge lifted one of the letters. "In this document, your client literally writes that once he reaches sufficient financial stability through Ms. Whitmore's support, he intends to leave." Silence. Ethan finally spoke. His voice sounded smaller than I expected. "I was angry when I wrote those." The judge tilted her head. "For 3 years?" Linda shifted sharply in her seat behind him. I didn't look at her. If I did, I might actually smile. Brent tried another angle. "Your Honor, regardless of emotional context, this remains a jointly shared property situation between long-term partners. My client contributed labor, time, and emotional support throughout the relationship." Dana responded immediately. "And Ms. Whitmore contributed financially while unknowingly being treated as an exit strategy." That landed hard. I saw it hit Ethan physically. His shoulders tightened. His jaw flexed once. Good. For the first time since the attic, I wanted him to feel something close to what I felt. Not heartbreak. Exposure. After nearly 2 hours, the judge gave preliminary rulings. The house would remain primarily under my ownership due to the inherited down payment and disproportional contribution history. Ethan would receive a reduced equity share rather than half. The joint savings would be divided according to documented percentages, not evenly. The attempted withdrawal after confrontation was formally noted against him. And perhaps most satisfying of all, the judge openly questioned Ethan's credibility regarding his financial intentions. Brent objected repeatedly. It changed nothing. When the hearing ended, Ethan looked stunned. Not because he lost everything, because he genuinely believed he would lose nothing. Outside the courtroom, Linda intercepted me before Dana could stop her. "You're enjoying this," she hissed. I stared at her. "No," I said honestly. "That's the sad part. You ruined him." "He did that himself." "You could have handled this privately." I almost laughed. Privately. Like the letters? Like the years of manipulation hidden behind affectionate smiles. "I handled it legally," I replied. "You're cold." That word again. Cold. Women who refuse humiliation were always cold to people who benefited from their warmth. Linda stepped closer. "He loved you." I looked past her, toward Ethan standing near the courthouse stairs. He looked exhausted now. Smaller somehow. For one dangerous second, grief punched through my anger, hard enough to make breathing difficult. Because I had loved him. Completely. And losing someone you loved still hurts, even when they deserve to be lost. But then I remembered the letters. Useful. Safe. Almost there. I looked back at Linda. No, I said quietly. He loved what I made possible. Dana guided me toward her car before Linda could answer. Inside, she exhaled slowly. That went better than expected. It doesn't feel good. It rarely does. I stared out the window as rain streaked across the glass. Why do I still feel guilty sometimes? Dana was silent for a moment. Because healthy people feel guilt when relationships end, she said finally. Manipulative people rely on that. The final settlement process moved quickly after the hearing. Ethan's legal position weakened significantly once the judge's preliminary opinion became clear. Brent stopped acting confident after that. By the second negotiation meeting, the tone shifted entirely, from aggressive defense to damage control. Ethan would receive compensation for his partial equity share. But I kept the house. My retirement accounts remained untouched. The joint savings split reflected actual contribution percentages. No additional claims. No extended financial ties. Clean separation. Objectively, I won. Emotionally, it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving surgery. Necessary. Successful. Still painful. 3 days before the final signing, Ethan sent one last email through Brent's office requesting a private conversation. Just closure, he wrote. I declined immediately. Not because I hated him. Because I finally understood something important. Closure is often just another name for access. And Ethan had already taken enough from me. The final papers were signed on a Thursday morning. No dramatic speeches. No screaming. No cinematic collapse in the courthouse hallway. Just signatures. Initials. Dates. The quiet sound of a relationship being reduced to legal language. Dana sat beside me while I signed the final page. Claire Whitmore retained primary ownership of the property. Joint accounts dissolved. Shared obligations terminated. It was astonishing how clean heartbreak looked in official formatting. When everything was finished, Dana closed the folder gently. That's it, she said. 5 years together ended in 2 words. That's it. I expected to feel victorious, or devastated, or maybe relieved enough to cry. Instead, I felt strangely hollow. Like my emotions had burned themselves out weeks earlier in the attic beside that dusty shoebox. Outside the building, the air smelled like rain and cold concrete. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment while people rushed around me carrying umbrellas and coffee cups, completely unaware that my entire future had just changed. Dana touched my arm lightly. You okay? I considered lying, then decided against it. I think so, I said. I just don't know what okay looks like anymore. Her expression softened. It looks quiet at first. That turned out to be true. The weeks afterward were painfully quiet. No Ethan humming while making coffee. No late-night television drifting from the living room. No random texts asking if we needed groceries. The silence should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt cautious. Like the house itself no longer trusted easily. I started changing things slowly. The bedroom first. I painted the walls a deep, muted gray-blue Ethan would have hated because he always said dark colors made rooms feel emotionally heavy. That should have been my first warning about him, honestly. A man who wanted every room bright enough to hide in. I replaced the bedding, moved the furniture, took down framed photos one by one. Vacation pictures, holiday dinners, smiling faces that suddenly looked like evidence instead of memories. There was one photo from a vineyard trip where Ethan had his arm wrapped around my waist while staring directly into the camera with that charming half smile everyone trusted immediately. I remember holding that frame for nearly 10 minutes. Not because I missed him, because I couldn't tell anymore which moments had been real. That uncertainty was the cruelest part, not knowing if I had ever actually been loved or merely managed. One Saturday, while reorganizing the hallway closet, I found one of Ethan's sweaters shoved behind extra blankets. I sat on the floor holding it longer than I should have. It still smelled faintly like his cologne. And suddenly, grief hit me so hard I couldn't breathe properly. Not grief for the relationship. Grief for the future I thought I had. There's a difference. People don't talk about that enough. Sometimes you're mourning the person. Sometimes you're mourning the version of yourself who believed them. I cried for maybe 15 minutes. Then I threw the sweater into a donation bag and kept cleaning. Healing, I discovered, was deeply uncinematic. Mostly, it looked like continuing anyway. Ethan attempted contact one final time about 3 weeks after the settlement. Not directly. Through a handwritten letter delivered by certified mail. I almost laughed when I saw the envelope. Of course he chose a letter. The irony was almost artistic. I opened it at the kitchen counter while reheating soup. 5 pages. Apologies. Explanations. Emotional rewrites of history. According to Ethan, the letters to Marissa had never reflected reality. He claimed they were fantasy versions of escape, written during periods when he felt insecure and inadequate beside my success. He wrote that I intimidated him financially, that he loved me but feared dependency, that Marissa represented a younger version of himself before adulthood became complicated. Then came the line that nearly made me tear the letter in half. You were always the real future. I stared at those words for a long time. Not because I believed them, because they were almost believable. That was Ethan's gift. He knew how to shape language around vulnerability until manipulation sounded sincere. For a brief moment, I imagined what would happen if I answered. If we met for coffee. If he cried. If I cried. If loneliness convinced me history could be rewritten. That fantasy lasted less than 30 seconds. Then I remembered sitting in the attic, reading the sentence about using me for stability. I folded the letter carefully, walked to the trash can, and dropped it in. No ceremony, no dramatic satisfaction. Just finished. A few days later, I ran into his friend Daniel at a grocery store. He looked deeply uncomfortable the second he saw me. "Claire," he said cautiously. "Daniel." Awkward silence settled between us while shoppers pushed carts around us. Finally, he sighed. For what it's worth, I didn't know. I nodded once. I believe you. He's not doing great. There it was again. That strange expectation people had that I should care, as if suffering automatically erased betrayal. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. He says he messed everything up. He did. He really loved you. I looked at him calmly. Maybe, I said, but not enough to stop calculating what I was worth. Daniel had no response to that. Neither did most people. Because that was the uncomfortable truth underneath everything. Love without respect becomes consumption. A month after the settlement, Marissa emailed me once more. Short. Simple. I'm sorry he used my name to hurt you. I truly wish you peace moving forward. I never answered. Not out of anger. Just exhaustion. I wanted all of it behind me. Completely. Work became easier eventually. Sleep became easier too. Some nights I still woke up replaying details in my head. The way Ethan smiled while talking about future renovations. The nights he encouraged me to invest more aggressively. The softness in his voice when he called me safe. I used to think safe meant cherished. Now I understood it could also mean convenient. That realization changed something fundamental in me. Not permanently broken, just permanently aware. Therapy helped. More than I expected. My therapist once asked me, "What's the hardest part to forgive?" I thought she meant Ethan, but she didn't. The hardest part, I admitted slowly, is forgiving myself for not seeing it sooner. She smiled gently. "You saw what he trained you to see." That sentence stayed with me, because manipulation rarely arrives looking cruel. Usually it arrives looking attentive, patient, supportive. By the time the damage becomes visible, trust has already built the door from the inside. 6 months later, the house finally felt like mine. Not ours. Mine. The living room was different now. Warmer. Quieter. Real. One evening, I sat alone on the back patio watching rain move through the trees while music played softly inside. And for the first time since the attic, I realized something surprising. I no longer wanted revenge. Not emotional revenge. Not financial revenge. Not even apologies. I just wanted distance. Complete and irreversible distance from the version of myself who accepted half love because it came wrapped in companionship. Ethan once wrote that he planned to leave when the timing benefited him most. In the end, that timing never became his choice. That was the only irony that still satisfied me. Not because I beat him, because I freed myself before he could finish using me. I'm 36 years old. I still have trust issues. I still double-check people's intentions sometimes. But I also have my home, my future, my name untouched by deception. And most importantly, I no longer confuse being needed with being loved. That lesson cost me 5 years and almost destroyed me. But I survived it. Carefully. Quietly. Completely.